The summer heat in Miami's Liberty City was suffocating that June morning in 2012. Jean-Baptiste Moreau wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked through the weathered doors of his auto repair shop on Northwest 62nd Street. At 53 years old, his hands were calloused from decades of hard work, his back bent slightly from the weight of supporting his family through 2 jobs. But his eyes, those dark brown eyes that had seen too much violence in his native Haiti before immigrating to America in 1989, still held the fire of a man who refused to be broken by this world. Jean-Baptiste had built a life here in Liberty City, a neighborhood that most people only knew from news reports about gang violence and poverty. But to him it was home. It was where he had raised his daughter Nadege, where he had taught her to be strong, to be proud of her Haitian heritage, to never let anyone make her feel less than she was. Nadege was 21 now, studying nursing at Miami-Dade College, working part-time at a local clinic. She was everything Jean-Baptiste had dreamed of when he had fled the chaos of Port-au-Prince all those years ago. She was his hope, his future, his reason for every sacrifice he had ever made. That morning started like any other. Jean-Baptiste opened the shop at 7, made his coffee in the small break room, and began working on a transmission that had been giving him trouble for 2 days. His partner Marcus wouldn't arrive until 9, so he had the quiet hours to himself. He liked it that way. The solitude, the smell of oil and metal, the satisfaction of fixing something that was broken. It was honest work, work that made sense in a world that often didn't. His phone rang at 8:15. He almost didn't answer, his hands were covered in grease and he was in the middle of a delicate adjustment. But something made him reach for it, something instinctive, the way a parent always knows when something is wrong. The number was unknown. He answered anyway. The voice on the other end was distorted, run through some kind of electronic modifier that made it sound robotic and inhuman. But the words were clear enough to stop his heart mid-beat. We have your daughter. If you want to see her alive again, you will follow our instructions exactly. We want $200,000. You have 48 hours. We will call you again with details. If you contact the police, if you tell anyone, we will send you pieces of her. Do you understand? Jean-Baptiste's hand tightened around the phone so hard the case cracked. His voice, when he found it, was barely a whisper. Where is she? What have you done to her? The voice laughed, a cold mechanical sound that would haunt Jean-Baptiste's dreams for the rest of his life. She's alive. For now. Do as we say and she stays that way. 48 hours. The line went dead. For a moment, Jean-Baptiste stood frozen in the middle of his shop, the phone still pressed to his ear, his mind unable to process what he had just heard. Then reality crashed down on him like a physical weight. Nadege. His little girl. His everything. In the hands of monsters who saw her as nothing more than a commodity, a way to make money, a thing to be bargained with. He called her number. It went straight to voicemail. He called her roommate, a girl named Chantel who lived with her in a small apartment near the college. Chantel's voice was thick with sleep and confusion. I don't know, Mr. Moreau. She left for her shift at the clinic yesterday morning. She was supposed to be home by 7 but she never showed up. I thought maybe she was staying at your place or something. I was actually about to call her. Jean-Baptiste felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Yesterday morning. She had been missing for more than 24 hours and no one had noticed. No one had raised an alarm. The kidnappers had chosen their moment perfectly, that window of time when a young adult's absence wouldn't immediately trigger panic. His first instinct was to call the police. That was what you were supposed to do, wasn't it? That was how the system worked. But the voice on the phone echoed in his mind. If you contact the police, we will send you pieces of her. And Jean-Baptiste knew, with the certainty of someone who had grown up in a place where the police were as dangerous as the criminals, that these were not idle threats. These men had taken his daughter. They had the upper hand. And if he made one wrong move, if he deviated from their script even slightly, they would kill her. $200,000. He didn't have $200,000. He didn't have $20,000. His life savings, carefully built over 23 years of grinding work, amounted to maybe $35,000. His shop was mortgaged. His house was mortgaged. He could maybe scrape together $50,000 if he sold everything he owned and begged every friend and family member for help. But $200,000? It might as well have been $2 million. The rational part of his brain told him this was impossible, that he needed help, that he needed to bring in the authorities. But another part of him, the part that had survived the Tonton-Macoutes in Haiti, the part that had seen what happened to people who trusted the wrong institutions, knew that Nadege's life hung by a thread. And he was the only one who could save her. He closed the shop. He didn't explain why to Marcus when his partner called, confused about the locked doors. He simply said there was an emergency and he would be in touch. Then Jean-Baptiste went home to the small 3-bedroom house in Liberty City where he had raised Nadege, where her bedroom still held her childhood drawings and her high school trophies. He sat at his kitchen table and he made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. He would not pay the ransom. He couldn't even if he wanted to. But more importantly, he wouldn't. Because Jean-Baptiste Moreau had learned long ago that giving in to evil didn't make it go away. It only fed it, made it stronger, ensured that it would come back for more. These men had taken his daughter not because of anything she had done, but because they were predators who saw the vulnerable as prey. And if he paid them, they would simply move on to the next victim. And the next. And the next. No, he would not pay them. He would find them. And he would make them regret the day they had ever heard the name Nadege Moreau. Jean-Baptiste had skills that most people didn't know about. Before he had become an auto mechanic in Miami, before he had built his quiet American life, he had been someone else in Haiti. During the chaos of the late 80s, when the Duvalier regime was collapsing and the country was tearing itself apart, Jean-Baptiste had been part of a resistance cell. They had fought the Tonton Macoutes, the brutal secret police who terrorized the population. He had learned how to track people who didn't want to be found. He had learned how to extract information from those who didn't want to talk. He had learned how to survive in a world where violence was the only language that mattered. He had thought he had left that life behind. He had come to America precisely to escape it, to give his daughter a chance at something better. But now that old life was calling him back, because the skills he had learned in the blood-soaked streets of Port-au-Prince were exactly what he needed to bring Nadege home. The kidnappers called again exactly 24 hours later. Jean-Baptiste was ready this time, his phone connected to a recording device he had bought at an electronics store. The voice was the same, robotic and cold. "You have 24 hours remaining. We will text you an address. You will bring the money in a duffel bag. You will come alone. Any deviation from these instructions will result in your daughter's death." Jean-Baptiste kept his voice steady. "I want proof she's alive. I want to hear her voice." There was a pause. Then Nadege's voice came through the phone, terrified and small. "Papa? Papa, please help me. They said they'll kill me if you don't." The line cut off. The robotic voice returned. "You have your proof. 24 hours. Jean-Baptiste played the recording back 17 times, listening to every background noise, every ambient sound. He heard traffic in the distance. He heard what sounded like a train or maybe a truck on a highway. He heard a bird, possibly a crow or a raven. And underneath it all, he heard the faint hum of industrial equipment, something mechanical and constant. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He began with the clinic where Nadege worked, a small community health center in Overtown. He spoke to her supervisor, a kind woman named Dr. Patricia Santos, who was already worried about Nadege's absence. She told him that Nadege had left at her usual time, around 6:30 in the evening 2 days ago. She had walked out to the parking lot. Security footage showed her getting into her car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that Jean-Baptiste had helped her buy and maintain. The footage showed her driving out of the lot, turning north onto Northwest 14th Avenue. Jean-Baptiste requested copies of the footage. Dr. Santos hesitated, mentioned privacy policies and procedures, but something in Jean-Baptiste's eyes made her comply. He took the USB drive and left, his mind already racing ahead to the next step. He drove Nadege's usual route home, looking for anything unusual, any place where she might have been intercepted. He found it 3 blocks from the clinic, at a red light on the corner of Northwest 14th Avenue and 54th Street. There was a gas station on the corner and it had security cameras. The gas station manager, a tired-looking Middle Eastern man named Ahmed, was less cooperative than Dr. Santos. He refused to show Jean-Baptiste the footage without a police report. Jean-Baptiste went to his car, returned with $300 in cash and asked again. Ahmed's principles proved flexible. He burned the footage onto a DVD and handed it over without further comment. Jean-Baptiste watched the footage in his car. And there it was. Nadege's Honda pulling up to the red light. A white van pulling up beside her. The van's side door sliding open. 3 men, their faces covered with ski masks, pouring out. One of them smashing Nadege's window. Her struggling, fighting back just like he had taught her. But there were 3 of them and they were strong, and within 30 seconds they had dragged her from her car into the van. The whole thing took less than a minute. Then the van was gone, running the red light and disappearing into traffic. Jean-Baptiste rewound the footage, paused it, zoomed in on the van. It was a Ford Econoline, probably late 2000s model, white with no markings. But there was something on the back bumper, a sticker or a decal. He couldn't make it out clearly on the gas station's grainy footage. He needed a better angle. He spent the next 8 hours canvassing every business within a 3-block radius, asking about security cameras, offering cash, calling in every favor he had accumulated over 23 years in this community. A barbershop had a camera pointing toward the street. A corner store had another. An apartment building had one covering its parking lot. Jean-Baptiste collected footage from all of them, pieced together the van's route. The van had headed north on Northwest 14th Avenue, then west on 62nd Street, then north again on Interstate 95. Jean-Baptiste followed the trail as far as the footage would take him, which was to the entrance ramp of I-95 northbound. After that, he lost them. But he had the van. He had the make and model. And he had that decal on the bumper. He took the clearest image he could get from the barbershop's surprisingly high-quality camera, and he enlarged it on his computer. The decal was a company logo, a stylized image of a wrench and a gear. And beneath it, partially obscured, the words Industrial Solutions. Jean-Baptiste spent 6 hours on the internet, searching for companies with that name and logo. He found 17 possibilities spanning 3 states. He narrowed it down based on the bird sound he had heard in the background of the phone call. Ravens were common in South Florida, but they were even more common further north. He focused his search on Georgia and South Carolina. He found it at 2 in the morning. A company called Southeastern Industrial Solutions, based in Savannah, Georgia. They serviced industrial equipment, warehouses, factory machinery. The logo matched. And when Jean-Baptiste looked up their fleet of vehicles, he found that they used white Ford Econoline vans for service calls. It was a tenuous connection. The van could have been stolen. The decal could have been faked. But it was all he had, and his time was running out. The deadline was in 18 hours. Jean-Baptiste didn't sleep. He loaded his car with supplies. A hunting knife. A length of rope. Zip ties. Duct tape. A flashlight. A crowbar. Tools from his shop. And a machete, the same one he had carried in Haiti 25 years ago, the one he had used to defend his family from the Tonton Macoutes, the one he had sworn he would never use again. He wrapped it in cloth and placed it gently in his trunk, a promise and a threat in equal measure. He drove through the night, straight up Interstate 95 toward Savannah. He arrived at dawn, the sun rising over the flat Georgia landscape, casting long shadows across the industrial parks and warehouses that lined the highway. He found Southeastern Industrial Solutions in a complex of anonymous buildings on the outskirts of the city, all corrugated metal and faded paint. He parked across the street and waited. He watched the employees arrive for work, driving in with their coffee and their lunch boxes, just ordinary people doing ordinary jobs. He watched the fleet of white vans, counting them, looking for any sign of damage or disturbance. And then at 7:45 he saw it. A white Ford Econoline pulling into the lot, with a dent in the front fender and a cracked taillight. The driver was a young white man in his mid-20s, wearing a company uniform but with tattoos crawling up his neck and onto his face. Jean-Baptiste waited until the man went inside the building. Then he walked across the street, casual and unhurried, just another person starting their day. He approached the van, looked around to make sure no one was watching, and slipped a small GPS tracker under the rear bumper. It was a cheap device he had bought at the electronics store, the kind marketed to worried parents tracking their teenagers. But it would do the job. He returned to his car and waited some more. The man came back out at 9, got into the van and drove away. Jean-Baptiste followed at a distance, tracking him on his phone. The van didn't go to a service call. It went to a warehouse on the industrial side of town, a squat concrete building with barred windows and a rusted metal door. The man parked and went inside. Jean-Baptiste drove past, circled the block, came back. He parked 2 buildings down and watched. Over the next hour, 3 more men arrived. One of them was driving a BMW that seemed far too expensive for this neighborhood. He was older, maybe 40, well-dressed in a way that suggested money and authority. The others were younger, harder, with the look of men who had done time. Jean-Baptiste's instincts told him he had found them. Every detail fit. The industrial location would explain the mechanical hum in the background. The isolated setting would be perfect for holding a hostage. And these men, with their mixture of working-class desperation and criminal swagger, matched the profile of kidnappers who would target a nurse's daughter for ransom. But he needed to be sure. He needed to know that Nadege was inside that building. And he needed to know how many men he was dealing with. He waited until dark. Savannah in June stayed light until almost 9, and Jean-Baptiste used the time to study the warehouse, noting the entrances and exits, the lines of sight, the places where shadows gathered. When the sun finally set, he moved. He approached from the back where an alley ran between the warehouse and the building next to it. The rear door was locked, but it was an old lock, the kind that Jean-Baptiste had learned to pick during his resistance days. It took him less than 2 minutes. He slipped inside into darkness cut only by thin lines of light from under a door at the far end of the space. The warehouse was mostly empty, just some old equipment and stacks of pallets gathering dust. But there was a makeshift office built into one corner, and that's where the light was coming from. Jean-Baptiste moved like a ghost, his years of training coming back to him as if he had never left Haiti. He could hear voices from the office, rough male voices arguing about something. He crept closer, pressed himself against the wall, listened. Should just kill her and dump the body? This has been nothing but problems from the start. We're getting $200,000, Marcus. Just be patient. What if the old man doesn't pay? What if he goes to the cops? He won't. You heard his voice on the phone. He's scared. He'll pay. And if he doesn't? Then we kill her and move on. It's not complicated. Jean-Baptiste's blood ran cold. They were talking about Nadege like she was nothing, like her life had no more value than the numbers in their bank account. The old rage rose in him, the rage that had sustained him through the dark days in Haiti, the rage that had allowed him to do terrible things to terrible people without losing his humanity. These men had made a mistake. They had taken his daughter. And now they would learn what happened when you awaken something that was meant to stay sleeping. He needed to find Nadege to confirm she was here. He moved deeper into the warehouse, staying low using the shadows. He found another door, this one leading to what looked like an old storage room. He tested the handle. Locked. But he could see light underneath this door too. He put his ear to the wood and listened. At first he heard nothing. Then, faint as a whisper, he heard crying. A woman crying, trying to stay quiet, trying not to let her captors hear. Nadege. His little girl. Jean-Baptiste's hand went to the knife on his belt. Every instinct screamed at him to break down the door, to charge in and take her away from this place. But he forced himself to think clearly. There were at least 4 men in the building, possibly more. He had heard 3 voices in the office and he had seen 4 men arrive. They were younger than him, probably armed. If he tried to take them head-on right now, he would likely get himself killed. And Nadege would die too. No. He had to be smart. He had to be patient. He had to use his advantages, which were surprise and the willingness to do what needed to be done. He retreated from the warehouse as silently as he had entered, leaving the GPS tracker in place and returning to his car. He sat in the darkness, his mind working through scenarios and possibilities. The deadline was in 9 hours. The kidnappers would be expecting him to show up with money he didn't have. When he didn't appear, they would either call him demanding explanations or they would simply kill Nadege and dispose of the evidence. Jean-Baptiste couldn't let either of those things happen. Which meant he had to act before the deadline. He had to hit them before they were expecting it, before they had time to react. He checked his watch. 2 in the morning. He had 7 hours until dawn. Enough time to prepare, to position himself, to make sure that when he struck, it would be fast and final. He drove to a 24-hour Walmart and bought supplies. Bolt cutters. A can of gasoline. A lighter. A cheap prepaid phone. Rubber gloves. A change of clothes. The clerk, a sleepy-eyed teenager, didn't even look at him twice. Just another customer in the middle of the night, buying random items for reasons that were none of his business. Jean-Baptiste returned to the warehouse and waited. He watched as the lights in the office went out around 3. The men were sleeping, probably taking shifts to watch Nadege. That was good. Sleeping men made mistakes. Sleeping men died easily. At 4:30, with the first gray light of dawn beginning to creep across the sky, Jean-Baptiste made his move. He approached the warehouse from the back again, but this time he didn't bother with stealth. He used the bolt cutters to snap the padlock on the rear door, then pulled it open with a screech of metal that echoed through the quiet morning. He wanted them to hear him. He wanted them to come investigate. Because men who came to investigate tended to come alone, or in pairs at most. And alone men were easy to handle. He waited just inside the door, pressed against the wall, the machete in his hand. He had unwrapped it from its cloth, and the blade gleamed dully in the pale light. He heard footsteps approaching, one set, moving cautiously. Perfect. The door to the office area opened. A young man emerged, maybe 25 years old, white with the neck tattoos Jean-Baptiste had seen before. He was holding a pistol, some kind of semi-automatic, but he was holding it carelessly, pointed at the ground. He clearly didn't think there was any real danger. This was probably just a raccoon or a homeless person messing with the door. He was 3 steps into the warehouse when Jean-Baptiste moved. He came out of the shadows like death itself, the machete swinging in a perfect arc that he had practiced 1,000 times in another life. The blade caught the young man in the neck just below the jaw and cut deep. Not deep enough to decapitate him, not yet, but deep enough to sever the carotid artery and the windpipe. The man tried to scream, but only a wet gurgling came out. He dropped the pistol and grabbed at his throat, blood pouring between his fingers. Jean-Baptiste caught him as he fell, lowered him quietly to the concrete floor. The man's eyes were wide with shock and terror, the realization of his own death written across his face. Jean-Baptiste felt nothing. No satisfaction, no remorse, nothing but the cold calculation of what needed to be done. This man had helped kidnap his daughter. This man had been prepared to kill her for money. This man deserved what he got. He picked up the pistol, checked the magazine. 15 rounds. He waited for the man to stop moving, which took longer than he would have liked but was still less than a minute. Then he moved toward the office. The problem with the element of surprise was that you could only use it once. Now the other men knew something was wrong. They would be alert, armed, ready. But they also didn't know what they were facing. They didn't know that Jean-Baptiste Moreau had been fighting men like them since before they were born. They didn't know that he had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. And most importantly, they didn't know that he would burn this entire building to the ground if that's what it took to save his daughter. Jean-Baptiste approached the office door, which was now closed. He could hear urgent voices inside, men arguing in hushed tones. He counted 3 distinct voices, which meant there were 3 men left. Plus whoever was guarding Nadege in the storage room, if that person was different from these 3. He considered his options. He could try to negotiate, to call out and demand they release Nadege in exchange for his leaving peacefully. But these were not men who negotiated. These were predators who understood only force. Talking to them would just give them time to organize, to fortify their position, to potentially use Nadege as a human shield. No. The only way forward was through. Jean-Baptiste kicked the door open and went in low and fast, the pistol up and ready. The office was small and cramped, just a desk and some filing cabinets and 3 men who were turning toward him in surprise. He shot the first one in the chest before the man could raise his weapon, a shotgun that clattered to the floor as he fell. The second man got his pistol up, but Jean-Baptiste was faster, putting 2 rounds center mass and watching him crumple. The third man, the older one in the expensive clothes who had arrived in the BMW, held his hands up in surrender. Wait. We can work this out. You want money? I'll give you money. Jean-Baptiste stared at him, this man who had orchestrated his daughter's kidnapping, who had terrorized her and threatened to cut her into pieces, who was now begging for his life like the coward he was. He should have killed him right there. It would have been easy. But he needed information first. Where is she? Where's my daughter? The man pointed toward the back of the warehouse with a shaking hand. Storage room. She's fine, I swear. We haven't hurt her. Please, you don't have to do this. We can make a deal. How many others are in this building? Just us. Just the 4 of us. Please, I have a family. Jean-Baptiste hit him across the face with the pistol, a sharp crack that broke the man's nose and sent blood streaming down his chin. You took my family. You threatened to kill my daughter. And now you want to talk about your family? The man whimpered, tears mixing with the blood on his face. I'm sorry. It was just business. We needed the money. Please. Where's the key to the storage room? The man fumbled in his pocket and produced a key ring. Jean-Baptiste took it, then used the zip ties he had brought to bind the man's hands and feet. He gagged him with duct tape, then left him lying on the floor among the bodies of his accomplices. Jean-Baptiste moved through the warehouse to the storage room, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. He fumbled with the keys, found the right one, unlocked the door. Nadege was inside, huddled in the corner, her hands bound with rope, her clothes dirty and torn. When she saw him, she started crying, great heaving sobs of relief and terror. Papa. Papa, you came. Jean-Baptiste fell to his knees and wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling the warmth of her body and thanking God or fate or whatever force in the universe had allowed him to find her alive. I'm here, baby. I'm here. You're safe now. He cut the ropes binding her hands, helped her to her feet. She was shaking, traumatized but physically unharmed. They hadn't hurt her beyond the psychological torture of captivity and fear. For that, at least, Jean-Baptiste was grateful. It meant their deaths could be quick. Did they hurt you? Did they? No, they didn't. They just kept me locked in here. They said they were going to kill me if you didn't pay. Papa, I was so scared. I know, baby. I know. But it's over now. Come on, we need to get out of here. He led her out of the storage room, shielding her eyes as they passed through the office where two bodies lay in spreading pools of blood. She didn't need to see that. She didn't need to know what he had done, what he was capable of. She just needed to get home safe. They were almost to the back door when Jean-Baptiste heard a sound behind them. He turned to see the older man, the one he had tied up, somehow having worked his way partially free. The man had managed to get the gag off and was screaming, "Help! Help! Murder! Someone help!" Jean-Baptiste's mind raced. They were in an industrial area, isolated, but sound carried in the pre-dawn quiet. If someone heard, if someone called the police, everything would fall apart. He would be arrested for murder. Nadege would be left alone. The truth of what these men had done would be buried beneath the weight of Jean-Baptiste's own crimes. He couldn't let that happen. He told Nadege to wait by the door, to not look back no matter what she heard. Then he returned to the office. The man looked up at him with terrified eyes, knowing what was coming. Please, I'm begging you. I have a wife. I have kids. Please." Jean-Baptiste thought about all the people this man had victimized, all the families he had destroyed in pursuit of money. He thought about Nadege, trembling and terrified in that storage room, not knowing if she would live or die. He thought about mercy and whether men like this deserved it. He raised the machete. What happened next happened quickly. The blade fell. The man's screaming stopped. And Jean-Baptiste Moreau completed the transformation from mechanic to executioner, crossing a line he could never uncross. He rejoined Nadege at the door, his clothes spattered with blood, his hands shaking with adrenaline. She looked at him with wide eyes but said nothing. She was smart enough to understand that some things were better left unspoken. They drove back to Miami in silence, Jean-Baptiste watching the rearview mirror constantly for police cars that never came. He had wiped down the warehouse as best he could, removing obvious traces of his presence. He had taken the security camera hard drive from the office. He had done what he could to cover his tracks. But he knew it was only a matter of time before someone discovered the bodies, before the investigation began, before questions were asked that he couldn't answer. He dropped Nadege at home with instructions to tell everyone she had been held in Miami, that she had escaped when her captors were distracted, that she didn't know where the warehouse was or who the men were. She nodded, still silent, still processing the trauma of the last 3 days. He held her one more time, told her he loved her, and drove away before she could ask the questions he couldn't answer. Jean-Baptiste returned to his house in Liberty City and tried to go back to his normal life. He went to work. He fixed cars. He had dinner with friends. But inside he was different. Something had broken open in him in that warehouse in Savannah, something dark and violent that had been locked away for decades. And now that it was free, he wasn't sure he could control it. 3 days later, the news broke. 4 bodies discovered in a Savannah warehouse. Brutal murders. Execution-style killings. Police were investigating but had few leads. The victims were identified as members of a kidnapping ring that had been active across 3 states. Authorities believed the murders were connected to a failed ransom demand, possibly retaliation from a previous victim or a rival criminal organization. Jean-Baptiste watched the reports with a blank expression, feeling nothing. The talking heads on TV speculated about gang violence, about turf wars, about the breakdown of law and order. None of them suspected that the killer was a 53-year-old auto mechanic watching from his living room in Miami. But the story didn't end there. Because the investigation into the kidnapping ring revealed something that made Jean-Baptiste's blood run cold. The 4 men he had killed were part of a larger network, a sophisticated operation that had been kidnapping victims across Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina for years. The older man, the one Jean-Baptiste had killed last, was named Richard Thornton, and he was just middle management. Above him were others, people with more power and resources, people who would not be happy that their operation had been disrupted. And below him were foot soldiers, men who had carried out the actual kidnappings, who had scouted the victims and executed the plans. Men who were still out there. Men who might come looking for revenge. Jean-Baptiste realized that saving Nadege had only been the beginning. He had cut off one head of the Hydra, but there were more. And as long as those heads remained, his daughter would never truly be safe. He began his research. Using the information he had taken from the warehouse, documents, a laptop, phone records, he started piecing together the network. Names emerged. Addresses. Connections to other crimes, other victims. Some of them were in Miami. Some were in Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach. Others were scattered across Georgia and into South Carolina. The police were investigating too, but slowly, hampered by jurisdictional issues and bureaucracy. They were making arrests, but only of the low-level operators, the expendable pawns. The people at the top remained untouched, protected by layers of legal insulation and plausible deniability. Jean-Baptiste decided that if the law couldn't protect the innocent, he would. He had already crossed the line. He had already become a killer. Doing it again and again and again, what difference did it make? These men were predators. They destroyed lives for profit. And someone needed to stop them. Over the next 3 months, Jean-Baptiste hunted them. He used every skill he had learned in Haiti, every technique of tracking and surveillance and interrogation. He found them in their homes and their hideouts. He found them in bars and strip clubs and cheap motels. And one by one he made them pay for what they had done. The fifth man was a scout in Miami Beach, someone who identified wealthy targets and passed the information up the chain. Jean-Baptiste found him in a nightclub bathroom, high on cocaine and bragging to his friends about his exploits. He followed him home, waited until the man was alone and confronted him. The man tried to fight, but Jean-Baptiste was faster, stronger, fueled by righteous fury. He extracted the names of 3 more men before he finished the job. The 6th and 7th men were enforcers in Fort Lauderdale, brothers who specialized in the physical aspects of kidnapping. They were dangerous, ex-military with combat training. But Jean-Baptiste had surprise on his side and determination. He caught them at their apartment, used the techniques he had learned decades ago to neutralize them before they could fight back. Their deaths were not quick. Jean-Baptiste needed information and he was willing to do whatever it took to get it. The 8th man was a driver in West Palm Beach. The 9th was a money man in Coral Springs, someone who laundered the ransom payments through a network of shell companies. The 10th was a corrupt cop in Miami who had been feeding information to the kidnapping ring, telling them which cases were being actively investigated and which victims were likely to pay. That one hurt Jean-Baptiste the most, the idea that someone sworn to protect people had instead betrayed them for money. That one he made suffer. With each kill, Jean-Baptiste refined his methods. He learned to be more efficient, more careful about evidence. He learned which techniques left too much forensic data and which ones could be cleaned up easily. He learned how to dispose of bodies, how to create false trails, how to make the deaths look like gang violence or drug deals gone wrong. The police were investigating, but they were looking for a gang war, not a middle-aged mechanic acting alone. The 11th through 13th men were all in Savannah, remnants of the original cell that had kidnapped Nadege. They had gone into hiding after Thornton's death, but Jean-Baptiste tracked them down through patience and persistence. He found them in a series of connected safe houses, moving from place to place trying to stay ahead of the investigation. But they couldn't run fast enough. Jean-Baptiste caught them one by one over the course of 2 weeks, each death more brutal than the last. He was no longer just protecting his daughter. He was cleansing the world of a disease. The 14th man was in Charleston, South Carolina, a recruiter who found desperate young men and brought them into the organization. Jean-Baptiste made him give up the names of everyone he had recruited over the past 5 years before ending his life in a motel room overlooking the harbor. The 15th and 16th were in Jacksonville, Florida, operating a new cell that was just getting started. Jean-Baptiste stopped them before they could take their first victim, saving some unknown family from the same nightmare his had endured. The 17th and final man was the one Jean-Baptiste had been searching for from the beginning, the one whose name kept appearing in documents and phone records but whose face remained hidden. Marcus Devereaux, the true architect of the kidnapping network, a former stockbroker who had turned to crime after the 2008 financial collapse. He lived in a mansion in Hilton Head, South Carolina, protected by security systems and armed guards, insulated from the consequences of his actions by wealth and distance. Getting to him required planning. Jean-Baptiste spent 2 weeks studying Devereaux's routines, his security, his vulnerabilities. He learned that Devereaux had a weekly poker game with business associates, men who knew nothing about his criminal enterprise. He learned that Devereaux's guards were professionals but complacent, used to protecting against business rivals and angry investors, not trained killers with nothing to lose. On a hot August night, 3 months after Nadege's rescue, Jean-Baptiste made his final move. He infiltrated Devereaux's property through the waterfront, swimming across the inlet under cover of darkness with his machete wrapped in waterproof plastic. He bypassed the security system using techniques he had learned from one of his victims, and he moved through the mansion like a ghost. He found Devereaux in his study, alone, counting money from the poker game. The man looked up in surprise as Jean-Baptiste emerged from the shadows, the machete gleaming in the lamplight. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "I'm Jean-Baptiste Moreau. You took my daughter. You threatened to kill her. Now I've come to collect what's owed." Understanding dawned in Devereaux's eyes, followed quickly by terror. Wait, I can pay you. I have millions. Whatever you want. I want justice. For my daughter. For every person you've hurt. For every family you've destroyed. Please? I'm sorry. I'll turn myself in. I'll confess to everything. Jean-Baptiste shook his head. Too late for that. What happened next was not quick. Jean-Baptiste had learned many things over the past 3 months, but the most important was that some men needed to understand the full weight of their crimes before they died. Devereaux understood by the end. He understood completely. Jean-Baptiste left the mansion the same way he had entered, through the water, leaving behind a scene that would haunt the investigators who found it. He drove through the night back to Miami, arriving at dawn just as the city was waking up. He went home, showered, changed his clothes, and went to work at his shop. Marcus asked him where he had been the past few months. Jean-Baptiste said he had been dealing with a family emergency. Marcus didn't press for details. Nadege called that afternoon. She was doing better, seeing a therapist, getting on with her life. She asked if he was okay. He said he was fine. She didn't believe him, he could hear it in her voice, but she didn't push. Some things were better left unspoken. The news reported Marcus Devereaux's death 2 days later. The police called it the most brutal killing in South Carolina history. They connected it to the 16 other murders across 3 states, finally understanding that they were dealing with a serial killer targeting a criminal network. The FBI got involved. Task forces were formed. But they were looking for a young man, probably someone with military training, possibly a former victim seeking revenge. They never suspected Jean-Baptiste Moreau, the quiet mechanic from Liberty City who fixed cars and went to church and loved his daughter more than life itself. Jean-Baptiste never killed again after that night. He had done what needed to be done. 17 men who had built their lives on the suffering of others were gone. The kidnapping network was destroyed. And Nadege was safe. He visits her every Sunday now. She graduated from nursing school and works at Jackson Memorial Hospital. She's engaged to a good man, a teacher, someone gentle who makes her laugh. She's building a life, the kind of life Jean-Baptiste had always dreamed she would have. Sometimes she looks at him with questions in her eyes, questions about those 3 months, questions about what really happened. But she never asks, and he never tells. Jean-Baptiste Moreau is 54 now. He still runs his auto repair shop. He still lives in Liberty City. To everyone who knows him, he's just an ordinary man living an ordinary life. But late at night, when he can't sleep, he unwraps the machete from its cloth and stares at it in the darkness. And he remembers what he did, what he became, to save the person he loved most in the world. He has no regrets. Not a single one. Because in the end there are some things worth killing for. Some things worth dying for. And protecting your child from monsters is at the top of that list. The 17 men learned that lesson too late. But they learned it thoroughly. And Jean-Baptiste Moreau sleeps soundly knowing that his daughter is safe, that justice was served, and that sometimes the only way to stop evil is to become something darker than evil itself. If you found this story gripping, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this video with someone who appreciates true crime stories that explore the depths of a father's love and the price of justice. Leave a comment below telling me what you would do in Jean-Baptiste's situation. Would you have paid the ransom? Would you have called the police? Or would you have done exactly what he did? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video. It helps the algorithm show this story to more people who need to hear it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.